My name is Madison Riley, 32 years old, and until last month I was a respected geneticist with a decade of groundbreaking research under my belt. That was before my mother stormed into my lab, shredding 10 years of my life's work, while screaming that my brother deserved grandfather's estate more than me. What she never expected was that I would watch so calmly as she destroyed everything. Or that, when our family lawyer revealed the DNA test results, my parents would realize they had made the most terrible mistake of their lives. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, and hit subscribe to hear how DNA unraveled my family's darkest secret. Growing up, my grandfather Arthur was my hero. While most kids had pictures of pop stars on their walls, I had a framed photo of him receiving the National Science Foundation Award for his contributions to biochemistry. Before turning to business and building his fortune in pharmaceutical development, he had been a brilliant scientist. Maddie. He would tell me, his eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. Curiosity is the most powerful force in the universe. Never stop asking why. My parents, Diana and Robert, never quite understood our connection. They were practical people who viewed science as a stepping stone to business, not a passion to pursue for its own sake. When I brought home perfect science grades, they would nod politely before turning their attention to my brother Thomas and his latest football victory or student council achievement. Thomas was 3 years older and seemed to walk through life with an ease I never possessed. Tall, charming, and naturally athletic, he embodied everything my parents valued. While I spent weekends doing science projects with grandfather, Thomas was the social butterfly who made our parents proud at community events. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became the unofficial soundtrack of my adolescence. When I announced my intention to pursue genetics research instead of a business degree, my father's disappointment was palpable. "Madison, the family business needs minds like yours," he argued, during one particularly heated dinner. "Your brother will handle the business operations, but we need your analytical skills for the research division." My mother nodded in agreement. "Your grandfather built this legacy for both of you to carry forward, not for you to abandon it for some university lab." But grandfather had other ideas. When I was accepted into Stanford's genetics program, he arrived at our house with champagne and a check covering my entire tuition. "The mind must follow its own path," he told my fuming parents. "Madison has the same spark I had at her age. I will not see it extinguished." That decision created the first major rift between my grandfather and my parents. While they eventually made peace on the surface, something fundamental had shifted. From that point forward, grandfather funded my education, and later my research, privately creating a separate relationship that excluded my parents. My research focused on rare hereditary conditions, specifically genetic markers that could predict susceptibility to certain autoimmune disorders. It wasn't glamorous work that made headlines, but it had the potential to help thousands of families understand their genetic risks and take preventative measures. Over 10 years, I built a solid reputation in the field, published in respected journals, and secured additional funding beyond grandfather's support. Meanwhile, Thomas followed the expected path into the family business, but struggled with the responsibility. There were rumors of missed meetings, questionable expenses, and business decisions that had to be reversed by my father. Still, in my parents' eyes, he could do no wrong. His failures were learning experiences, while my successes were merely what was expected of me. As grandfather's health began to decline 3 years ago, I found myself balancing my research with frequent visits to his estate. During those quiet afternoons, he would ask detailed questions about my work, his mind still sharp even as his body weakened. "You know, they still don't understand what you're doing," he confided during one of our last conversations, and I knew he meant my parents. "But I do. And it matters, Maddie. It matters more than they know." I noticed my parents visiting more frequently as well, often bringing Thomas along. Their conversations would abruptly halt when I entered the room, and there was a new tension in the air. Though nobody said it explicitly, there was a sense that preparations were being made, alliances formed. Grandfather's estate was substantial, including not just the pharmaceutical company shares, but real estate investments, and his beloved countryside mansion, where he had lived for over 40 years. My mother began making subtle comments about how family businesses should stay in the family, and how research can always find corporate sponsors. The implication was clear: they expected grandfather's assets to primarily support Thomas and the family business, not my independent research. I never asked grandfather about his will. Our conversations focused on science, on life, on his stories from the past. Money seemed vulgar to discuss while he was still fighting to stay with us. But sometimes I would catch him watching me with a thoughtful expression, as though he was calculating something important in his mind. The last time I saw him alive, he squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Stay true to your course, Madison," he said. "No matter what storms come, promise me." I promised, not knowing how soon that promise would be tested, or how violent the storm would be. The call came on a Tuesday night in October, while I was working late in my lab. I had just finished running a promising new analysis when my phone lit up with my father's number. Something in me knew before I answered. "He's gone," my father said, his voice uncharacteristically hollow. "In his sleep. The nurse found him." Despite our preparation for this moment, the finality hit me like a physical blow. I sat down hard on my lab stool, knocking over a stack of research papers. "The funeral will be on Friday," he continued when I couldn't speak. "We need to meet with Warren tomorrow about the will. 3 o'clock at his office." Warren Davis had been grandfather's attorney for over 30 years and a close friend. The abruptness of moving to business matters stung, but I was too numb to protest. "I will be there," I managed before ending the call. The funeral was a somber affair, held at the Episcopal church grandfather had attended his entire life. I sat in the front row between my mother and Thomas, acutely aware of the whispers behind us. As the sole heirs to the Riley fortune, we were the subject of much speculation. Thomas had his public face on, solemn but composed, occasionally wiping an invisible tear. My mother clutched her handkerchief, dramatically accepting condolences with practiced grace. My father stood stoic and unmovable, shaking hands firmly as mourners filed past. I alone sat quietly, my grief too raw and real for performance. The day after the funeral, we gathered in Warren's wood-paneled office. The elderly attorney greeted me with particular warmth, having watched me grow up through visits with grandfather. "Arthur spoke of your work often, Madison," he said quietly as he showed us to the conference room. He was tremendously proud. My mother's lips thinned at this comment, but she said nothing as we took our seats around the polished table. Warren adjusted his reading glasses and began. "Before I read the formal will, Arthur asked me to share a personal message." He opened a sealed envelope and read, "To my family, material possessions are merely tools. What matters is what we build with them. I have made my decisions based not on love, which I have given equally, but on purpose and potential. I ask that you respect my wishes and continue to support each other as I have supported all of you." Warren looked up, his expression grave. "The will is quite straightforward. To Robert and Diana Riley, Arthur leaves his vacation properties in Aspen and the Outer Banks, plus a cash bequest of $3 million. My parents nodded, clearly expecting this. To Thomas Riley, Arthur leaves his collection of classic automobiles, his stock portfolio of diversified investments valued at approximately $4 million, and a cash bequest of $2 million. Thomas smiled slightly, also appearing satisfied with this substantial inheritance. The remainder of the estate, Warren continued, including the primary residence, the controlling interest in Riley Pharmaceuticals, all intellectual property and patents, and the remaining liquid assets and investments, Arthur leaves to his granddaughter Madison Riley, with the expressed hope that she will use these resources to continue her scientific research for the betterment of humanity. The silence that followed was absolute. I sat frozen, unable to process what I had just heard. The remainder Warren mentioned represented at least 80% of grandfather's estate, valued conservatively at over $60 million. There must be some mistake, my father finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. Warren shook his head. There is no mistake. Arthur was very clear about his wishes. He updated this will just 3 months ago, with full legal capacity verified by 2 independent physicians. This is absurd. My mother's voice rose sharply. Madison has abandoned the family business to work on her pet projects. Thomas is the one who has stood by the company, who understands what Arthur built. Warren remained professional, but firm. Mrs. Riley, your father-in-law's decisions are legally binding. He specifically mentioned that Madison's research represents the kind of innovation that built Riley Pharmaceuticals in the first place. Thomas, who had been silently staring at the table, finally looked up at me. There was something unfamiliar in his expression, something beyond anger or disappointment. It looked almost like fear. Madison can sign over the company shares, he said, attempting to sound reasonable. She has no interest in running a pharmaceutical company. I found my voice at last. I need time to think. This is unexpected. There's nothing to think about. My mother's voice had taken on a shrill quality I'd never heard before. This is a mistake that needs to be corrected immediately. Warren intervened. I suggest everyone take some time to process this information. The assets will not be distributed for 30 days, regardless, as is standard procedure. As we left the office, my father gripped my arm in the hallway. We need to discuss this as a family. Tonight. I gently removed his hand. Not tonight. I need to get back to the lab. We can talk tomorrow. Madison. My mother's voice echoed in the hallway, causing heads to turn. Do not walk away from this. But I did walk away, back to the sanctuary of my lab, where things made sense, where evidence and logic prevailed over emotion and expectation. I knew the storm was coming, but I needed space to prepare for it. I texted my parents later that evening. I understand you're upset. I'm still processing everything too. Let's meet this weekend when everyone has had time to think clearly. Their response came immediately. This is not acceptable. Family meeting. Our house. Tomorrow at 7:00 p.m. I turned off my phone and lost myself in my work, focusing on the genetic sequences that had become more familiar to me than my own family dynamics. In the sterile, ordered environment of my lab, I could almost convince myself that I could find a rational solution to this irrational situation. But deep down, I knew that some problems could not be solved with scientific precision. The look in Thomas's eyes had told me everything I needed to know. This was not just about money or business. This was about something deeper, something that had been brewing beneath the surface of our family for decades. And now it was about to boil over. By morning, I had 17 missed calls, 29 text messages, and 13 voicemails. My parents had apparently spent the night cycling between anger, disbelief, and attempts at emotional manipulation. Your grandfather was not thinking clearly. Thomas has worked for this company for 9 years while you've been playing in a lab. This will destroy our family. You've always been selfish, but I never thought you'd go this far. Thomas's messages were more measured, but equally persistent. We need to talk about this reasonably, Maddie. The company is my life. You have your research. Think about what this will do to Mom and Dad. I responded with a single message to all 3. I will meet Saturday at 2 o'clock. Until then, I need space to think clearly. Then I turned my phone to silent and focused on my work. We were at a critical juncture in our research, having identified a promising genetic marker that could predict susceptibility to a rare autoimmune disorder that typically went undiagnosed until significant damage had occurred. If we could develop a reliable screening test, it could change treatment protocols worldwide. My research partner, Dr. Elaine Cho, noticed my distraction immediately. "Bad night?" she asked, as I stared blankly at the microscope. "Family issues," I replied vaguely. "My grandfather passed away last week." "I'm so sorry, Madison," she said, genuine concern in her voice. "Were you close?" "Very. He funded most of our early research, actually." Her eyebrows rose. I didn't realize. That explains a lot about your dedication to this project. I nodded, not ready to share the full complications. Let's focus on these new samples. The preliminary results look promising. We worked steadily through the day, and I began to feel the familiar calm that laboratory work always brought me. Here variables could be controlled, hypotheses tested, results quantified. Here I knew exactly where I stood. That sense of control shattered at 4:30, when my parents and Thomas walked unannounced into our laboratory. Madison. My father's voice boomed across the sterile space, causing several researchers to look up in alarm. This has gone on long enough. I felt heat rise to my face as I hurried toward them, conscious of my colleagues' curious stares. This is a restricted area. You can't just walk in here. We wouldn't have to if you'd answer your phone, my mother snapped loud enough for everyone to hear. I guided them firmly toward the exit and into the hallway. This is my workplace. You can't come barging in here making a scene. Your workplace. My father laughed bitterly. Funded by family money, I might add. Grandfather's money, I corrected, given specifically for this research. Money that should have gone to building the family business, my mother interjected. Money that Thomas could have used to expand into new markets. Thomas at least had the decency to look embarrassed. Can we please just talk somewhere private? I led them to a small conference room and closed the door, intensely aware that this conversation would be the talk of the lab within hours. I told you I would meet Saturday, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. This behavior is completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate is you refusing to discuss this, like an adult, my father countered. The future of our family business is at stake. A business I have never been part of, I reminded him. By your choice, not mine. That's not fair, Thomas interjected. You chose to leave. Because I was never given a real place there, I said. Dad made it clear the research division would always be under his control. I would just be a name on the door to impress the board. That's ancient history, my mother dismissed, with a wave of her hand. What matters now is doing what's right for the family. Your grandfather made a mistake. A mistake that coincidentally leaves me with control of the company. He was trying to force you back into the fold, my father insisted. He knew you'd have to engage with the business if you inherited it. I shook my head. That's not what the will said. He specifically mentioned supporting my research. Research that could benefit Riley Pharmaceuticals, Thomas pointed out. Under my leadership with your scientific input. The conversation circled for another 20 minutes, with the same arguments repeated in increasingly hostile tones. My mother's face grew flushed with anger. My father's voice became louder, and Thomas alternated between reasonable appeals and thinly veiled threats about what this would do to the family name. Finally, I stood up. I have work to finish. As I said, we can discuss this Saturday. If you walk out that door, my mother said, her voice shaking, you're choosing your precious research over your family. I looked at her directly. No, Mother. I'm choosing to honor Grandfather's wishes and the work he believed in. I'm sorry if that disappoints you. As I turned to leave, Thomas called after me. People are already talking. Maddie, cousins, aunts, uncles, family, friends. They're saying you manipulated him when he was vulnerable. Is that the reputation you want? The accusation stung more than I wanted to admit. Grandfather and I had always been close, but the idea that I would exploit that relationship for financial gain was deeply offensive. Spread whatever rumors you want, I said quietly. The truth will stand on its own. Back in the lab, I could feel my colleagues' curious glances. Dr. Cho approached cautiously. Everything okay? I took a deep breath. Family disagreement about my grandfather's estate. Nothing that should affect our work. She nodded, though her expression remained concerned. For what it's worth, we all know how dedicated you are to this research. No one who works with you would ever question your motives. Her support meant more than she could know, especially as my phone continued to vibrate with messages from extended family members and old family friends. Word was spreading fast, and as Thomas had warned, the narrative wasn't flattering to me. "My cousin, Angela, how could you do this to your brother? Everyone knows Thomas was being groomed to take over. My father's sister, your grandfather, would be heartbroken to see the family torn apart like this. Even my godmother, who had always been supportive, darling, is there some way to compromise? This situation looks terrible from the outside." I turned off my phone completely and threw myself into my work with renewed intensity. If people were going to question my dedication to this research, I would show them just how committed I was. That evening, I made a breakthrough that had eluded us for months. A particular genetic sequence that appeared consistently in patients who developed symptoms before age 30. It wasn't the complete answer, but it was a significant step forward. I stayed until midnight documenting everything, finding solace in the methodical process of recording data and observations. When I finally left the building, the security guard gave me a concerned look. "Working late again, Dr. Riley." I nodded, attempting a smile. "Important breakthrough." "Your dedication is admirable," he said, "but don't forget to take care of yourself too." As I drove home to my empty apartment, his words echoed in my mind. I had always defined myself through my work, through the pursuit of knowledge that could help others. But for the first time, I wondered if that singular focus had come at too high a cost. The thought disappeared as I checked my email one last time before bed and found a message from our department head. The university had received calls expressing concerns about my research funding and questioning my personal integrity. The family war had officially expanded beyond private arguments. Now they were attacking my professional reputation. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling, grandfather's last words to me, repeating like a mantra. "Stay true to your course, Madison, no matter what storms come." The storm had arrived, and it was only going to get worse. 3 days after the disastrous meeting at Warren's office, I was working late again. Our recent breakthrough had opened new research pathways, and I was determined to pursue them before meeting with my family on Saturday. Part of me hoped that with concrete progress to show, they might begin to understand why grandfather had made his decision. The laboratory was quiet at 9 p.m., with only the hum of equipment and occasional beep of machines breaking the silence. I had just finished preparing samples for tomorrow's analysis when I heard the security door slam open with unusual force. My mother stood in the doorway, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. Her hair was coming loose from its usual neat bun, and her eyes had a wild quality I had never seen before. "Mother, how did you get in here?" The security protocols were strict, especially after hours. "Your key card," she said, holding up the spare I had foolishly left at my parents' house years ago for emergencies. "We need to finish our conversation." I set down my pipette carefully. "This is not the place. We agreed to meet Saturday." "No, you decided Saturday. Just like you decided to take everything your brother has worked for." She stalked toward my workstation, looking around at the equipment and papers with naked contempt. "This," she gestured broadly, "this is what you chose over family, test tubes and microscopes, instead of people who love you." "That's not fair," I said, keeping my voice level. "My research helps people, real people with real medical conditions." "And the family business doesn't?" Her voice rose sharply. "Riley Pharmaceuticals employs over 800 people. It provides medications to millions. But that was never good enough for you, was it? You always had to be special, different." I took a deep breath. "Mother, you're upset. This isn't productive. Please let's talk when everyone is calmer." "Calmer." She laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the laboratory. "My father-in-law just gave my daughter control over my husband's birthright. The company Robert's family built for 3 generations. The company your brother has dedicated his life to. And you want me to be calm?" She picked up a research journal from my desk, flipping through it with growing agitation. This is what you think is so important. Has worth. This is worth destroying your family for. I'm not destroying anything, I said, growing concerned, as she moved closer to my organized research station. Grandfather made his decision. I had nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. Her voice rose to a shout. You spent every weekend with him, every holiday, talking about your precious research while Thomas was actually working in the company. You manipulated him, made him think this work was more important than family legacy. Before I could respond, she grabbed a stack of papers from my desk, 10 years of meticulously documented research notes. Mother put those down. For the first time, real alarm crept into my voice. Why are these more important than your brother's happiness? More important than your father's pride in the company he helped build? And then, with a swift motion that I would replay in my mind for months afterward, she began tearing the papers to shreds, throwing the pieces into the air with a terrible keening sound that was half sob, half scream. Your brother deserves grandfather's estate more than you. He has dedicated everything to this family while you hide in this sterile little world. I stood frozen as she moved to another station, sweeping equipment to the floor. Petri dishes, shattered samples spilled, and months of work scattered across the laboratory tiles. Stop. I finally managed, moving toward her. You're destroying irreplaceable research. But she was beyond reason now, tearing through my organized files, ripping papers, and knocking over carefully calibrated equipment. You think you can take everything, and there will be no consequences. You think you can hurt your brother like this, and I'll stand by and watch. What surprised me most, what would later surprise everyone who heard the story, was my own reaction. As my mother tore through 10 years of my life's work, I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. Perhaps it was shock. Perhaps it was the scientist in me observing a phenomenon with detached interest, but I simply stood and watched. This seemed to infuriate her further. Say something, she screamed, grabbing a microscope and shoving it off the counter. The expensive equipment crashed to the floor, lens shattering. What would you like me to say? I asked quietly. That I'll give up everything grandfather wanted for me, that I'll abandon the research he believed in. Yes, she shouted. Yes. That is exactly what you should say. That is what any loving daughter would do. I shook my head slowly. I can't do that. The security cameras captured everything: my mother's destructive rampage through the laboratory and my eerily calm response. They also captured her final words, as she stood amid the wreckage, chest heaving with exertion and emotion. This isn't over, Madison. We have found something that will change everything. When the truth comes out, you will regret your selfishness. After she left, I surveyed the damage with the same strange detachment. Equipment could be replaced. Digital backups existed for most of the destroyed data. The physical samples were the greatest loss, but even those could be recreated with time. What could not be repaired so easily was the relationship with my family. Whatever truth my mother believed, she had found whatever weapon they planned to use next had severed something fundamental between us. As I began the slow process of cleaning up, my phone buzzed with a text from Warren Davis: emergency family meeting, requested by your parents. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., my office. Attendance mandatory for all beneficiaries. I texted back a single word. Why? His response was equally brief: DNA test results. I sat heavily amid the scattered papers and broken glass, a chill running through me. DNA test. What could they possibly hope to prove? With a DNA test, grandfather was gone. Nothing could change that fact, or the will he had left behind. Unless they were trying to prove I wasn't really his granddaughter. The thought was so absurd that I nearly laughed out loud. I had inherited grandfather's distinctive gray-blue eyes, his left-handedness, even his unusual aptitude for molecular visualization. There had never been any question of our biological connection. Yet as I continued cleaning the laboratory, a nagging doubt began to form. My mother's final words echoed in my mind. We have found something that will change everything. What could they possibly have discovered? And why were they so confident it would change the outcome of grandfather's will? For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a flicker of genuine fear, not for the inheritance which had never been my primary concern, but for what this mysterious truth might mean for the family I thought I knew. Warren Davis's office felt colder than I remembered as I took a seat at the conference table the following afternoon. My parents and Thomas had arrived before me and sat together on one side, a united front. Warren himself looked troubled, his usual professional demeanor strained around the edges. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began shuffling papers before him. "I understand that Robert and Diana have requested this meeting to present new information they believe is relevant to Arthur's will." My father cleared his throat. "Yes, we have evidence that will significantly impact the distribution of assets." Warren nodded. "Before we proceed, I should note that Arthur's will is legally binding and quite specific. New information would need to be extremely compelling to warrant any reconsideration." "Oh, it is compelling," my mother said, her voice carrying the same brittle edge I had heard in the laboratory. "It changes everything." Warren turned to me. "Madison, are you prepared to hear this information? You have the right to legal representation." "I have nothing to hide," I said more calmly than I felt. "Please continue." My father placed a sealed envelope on the table. "We ordered a DNA test." Warren frowned. "I'm not sure I understand the relevance." "The relevance," my mother interjected, "is that Madison has no biological right to inherit Arthur's estate because she is not actually related to him." The accusation hung in the air so outlandish that for a moment no one spoke. "That's absurd," I finally said. "Grandfather and I share numerous genetic traits. Anyone who knew him can see the resemblance." "Superficial similarities can be coincidental," my father said. "We have scientific proof." Warren looked skeptical. "May I ask how you obtained DNA samples for this test?" "We had access to both Madison's hairbrush and items from Arthur's home," my mother explained, avoiding direct eye contact. "So, without consent," Warren noted, "I should inform you that evidence obtained without proper permission is generally inadmissible." "This isn't a court," my father insisted. "This is a family matter. The truth needs to be acknowledged regardless of how we discovered it." Warren sighed. "What exactly are you claiming?" My mother leaned forward. "We're claiming that Madison is not biologically related to Arthur Riley and therefore has no right to inherit the majority of his estate, which should rightfully go to his actual blood relative, Thomas." I felt strangely calm, perhaps, because the accusation was so transparently desperate. "That's simply not true. I'm happy to take another DNA test properly administered to put this matter to rest." Warren held up a hand. "Before we proceed further, there's something I need to share." He opened his desk drawer and removed another envelope. Arthur anticipated that something like this might occur. My parents exchanged nervous glances. 3 months ago, when Arthur updated his will, he also provided me with sealed DNA test results to be opened only in the event his biological relationship to either of his grandchildren was questioned. Warren adjusted his glasses. He was very specific about this provision. "That's not possible," my father said, his confidence visibly wavering. He had no reason to suspect anything. Warren continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "Arthur instructed me to reveal these results only if absolutely necessary. Given today's accusations, I believe that time has come." He opened the envelope carefully and reviewed its contents, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, his eyes rested briefly on each family member before he spoke. "According to these results, which were processed by an independent laboratory with proper chain of custody documentation, Madison is indeed Arthur's biological granddaughter, sharing the expected percentage of DNA markers." My mother's face paled. "And Thomas?" Warren hesitated, genuine regret in his eyes. "The test indicates that Thomas does not share a biological connection with Arthur Riley." The silence that followed was absolute. I felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. Thomas sat perfectly still, his expression frozen in disbelief. "That's impossible," my father finally whispered. "There must be some mistake." "The testing was comprehensive," Warren replied gently. "Arthur had the results verified by 2 separate laboratories." My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her purse. "This is a trick. Some kind of manipulation." When Thomas's voice cracked as he spoke for the first time. "When did he find out?" Warren consulted the paperwork. The tests were conducted approximately 4 years ago. 4 years, Thomas repeated hollowly. He knew for 4 years, and never said anything. I was struggling to process this revelation myself. Grandfather had known Thomas wasn't biologically related to him for 4 years yet, had maintained their relationship without ever revealing this knowledge. He had continued to support Thomas, to include him in family gatherings, to treat him as his grandson. "There's a letter," Warren said, removing a sealed envelope from the file. "Arthur asked that it be read if this situation arose." He opened it carefully and began to read. "To my family. If Warren is reading this letter, then the secret I hoped would remain buried has come to light. First and foremost, I want Thomas to know that you have been my grandson in every way that matters. Biology is merely science. Family is something far more profound. I discovered the truth accidentally, through routine genetic testing I underwent for a research study. My curiosity and scientific mind led me to investigate further, confirming what I had inadvertently learned. I chose to keep this knowledge to myself because I saw no benefit in disrupting the family with this revelation. Robert and Diana, I do not know the circumstances surrounding Thomas's birth, nor do I wish to. That is your private matter. I never judged you for it, and my love for all of you remained unchanged. My decisions regarding my estate were made with full knowledge of these biological facts, but they were not based on them. They were based on my assessment of character, purpose, and the potential for my legacy to continue making a positive difference in the world. Madison, your scientific mind and compassionate heart represent the best of who I tried to be. Thomas, your charisma and social intelligence are remarkable gifts that will serve you well if directed wisely. I hope that even in my absence, you can find a way forward as a family with honesty and mutual respect, replacing secrets and resentment. With enduring love, Arthur Riley. By the time Warren finished reading, my mother was quietly sobbing, her face buried in her hands. My father sat rigidly staring at a fixed point on the wall. Thomas looked utterly lost, a man whose entire identity had just been called into question. And I felt nothing but sadness, not triumph, not vindication, just profound sadness for the secrets that had poisoned our family from within. I think Warren said gently that everyone needs time to process this information. The legal standing of Arthur's will remains unchanged, but perhaps the more important matter now is how your family will move forward from here. Thomas stood abruptly. "I need some air." He walked out without looking at any of us, the door closing quietly behind him. My father finally turned to my mother. "Diana, is this true?" She couldn't meet his eyes. "Not here," she whispered. "Please, not here." I stood as well. I should go. Madison, Warren called as I reached the door. "Arthur wanted you to have this regardless of how today unfolded." He handed me a small key. "It opens his private study at the estate. He said you would know what to do with what you find there." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, and left my parents sitting in the broken remains of the family narrative we had all believed for so long. Outside, I found Thomas sitting on a bench in the small garden behind Warren's office building. Without a word, I sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. After several minutes of silence, he spoke. "Did you know?" "No," I answered honestly. "I had no idea." He nodded slightly, accepting this truth. 32 years believing one thing, and in 5 minutes everything changes. "Not everything," I said softly. "Grandfather loved you. That was real." "Was it?" Thomas asked, genuine anguish in his voice. "Or was I just an obligation? A secret He kept out of courtesy. You read his letter. He considered you his grandson regardless of biology. Thomas laughed bitterly. Easy to say when you're the one who gets everything. The inheritance was never about DNA, I insisted. It was about his vision for the future, about what we would do with his legacy. And he thought your work was more valuable than mine. The hurt in his voice was palpable. No, I said carefully. I think he believed my work needed his protection more than yours did. You have Mom and Dad's unwavering support. My research has always been vulnerable. We sat in silence for another long moment before Thomas stood. I need to talk to them, he said. I need to know the truth about where I came from. I nodded. I understand. As he turned to leave, he paused. Madison, I'm sorry about your lab. What Mom did, that wasn't right. It was a small olive branch, but in that moment it felt monumental. Thank you, I said simply. I watched him walk back into the building, his shoulders set in determination, before I pulled out my phone to call a cab. There was a private study waiting for me, and perhaps within it, the final pieces of my grandfather's puzzle. The key Warren had given me opened more than just grandfather's private study. It opened the door to a past my family had carefully concealed for over 3 decades. Inside the wood-paneled room, everything remained exactly as grandfather had left it. Books precisely arranged on shelves, papers organized in neat stacks, photographs displayed in simple silver frames. It was these photographs that drew my attention first. Among the familiar family portraits was one I had never seen before, a much younger version of my father standing beside a woman who was definitely not my mother. They were smiling, arms around each other, with the Alps visible in the background. On the back, written in grandfather's precise handwriting, Robert and Catherine Interlaken, 1989. I carefully opened the desk drawers, finding more photographs, letters, and finally a leather-bound journal with my name written on the first page. For Madison, when the time comes. The journal contained grandfather's private thoughts recorded over decades. I sat in his leather chair and began to read, piecing together the family history that had been hidden from me. Robert had been married briefly in his 20s to a woman named Catherine. They had separated after 3 years, but before the divorce was finalized, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She gave birth to Thomas, but struggled with postpartum depression and substance abuse. When Thomas was just 18 months old, Catherine had agreed to give Robert full custody. Shortly after, Robert had met Diana, and they married quickly. Diana had adopted Thomas legally, and they had agreed to never speak of his biological mother. A year later, I was born, and the narrative of our perfect family was firmly established. What grandfather had discovered through his genetic testing was not just that Thomas was not his biological grandson, but that Thomas's biological father wasn't Robert either. Catherine had apparently been involved with someone else during the marriage. The journal detailed grandfather's struggle with this knowledge, his initial shock and disappointment, his consideration of whether to reveal the truth, his ultimate decision that family bonds transcended genetics. Thomas is my grandson in all the ways that matter, he had written. I have watched him grow, guided his steps, celebrated his achievements. DNA cannot dictate the heart. Yet his concerns about Thomas's character emerged in later entries. Notes about questionable business decisions, reports from colleagues, about Thomas's behavior, observations of his sense of entitlement. Not condemnations, but worries from a man who had built his legacy through hard work and integrity. By contrast, his entries about my research were filled with pride and hope. He had followed my publications, understood the implications of my work in a way my parents never had, and believed in its potential to help countless people. His final entry, dated just weeks before his death, read, I have made my decision with clear eyes and a full heart. Thomas will have enough to live comfortably and pursue his ambitions. Madison will have what she needs to continue work that might change the world. Some will call this unfair. Perhaps it is. But fairness is not always equal distribution. Sometimes it is providing each person with what they truly need to fulfill their purpose. I closed the journal, overwhelmed by the weight of these revelations and the responsibility grandfather had placed on my shoulders. For hours, I sat in his study absorbing everything I had learned and considering what came next. The following morning, I drove to my parents' house, the journal securely in my bag. I found them in the kitchen looking exhausted and defeated. Thomas sat opposite them, his expression unreadable. "Madison," my mother began, her voice hollow. "We weren't expecting you." "I thought we should talk," I said simply, all of us with complete honesty for once. Thomas nodded slightly. "They told me everything last night." My father couldn't meet my eyes. "There's no excuse for the deception. We thought we were protecting the family." "By building it on lies," I asked, not unkindly. "We never intended for it to go this far," my mother said. "When Catherine abandoned Thomas, he needed stability, a mother. I loved him immediately. The adoption was legal, but we wanted him to feel fully part of the family." "So you erased his biological mother completely," I observed. Thomas laughed bitterly. "Apparently she wasn't who they claimed either. Dad thought she was seeing someone behind his back. That's why they separated." I didn't know for certain until the DNA test, my father admitted. But I had suspicions. It didn't matter. Thomas was my son from the moment I held him. I looked at my brother, seeing him truly for perhaps the first time. Not as the golden child who had always received preferential treatment, but as someone who had unknowingly lived a lie his entire life. "Are you okay?" I asked him directly. He shrugged. "I don't know what I am anymore. Not a Riley by blood. Not even my father's son biologically. Definitely not the rightful heir to grandfather's company." There was bitterness in his voice, but also genuine confusion. "Grandfather didn't see it that way," I said, pulling out the journal. "He left this for me to find. He considered you his grandson regardless of biology. He loved you, Thomas." "But not enough to trust me with his legacy," Thomas countered. "That wasn't about love," I explained carefully. "It was about purpose, about what we would do with what he left us." My father looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that grandfather made his decision based on character and vision, not DNA. And after everything that's happened, I need to make mine the same way." I turned to Thomas directly. "The company needs someone who understands its operations, its people, someone who has been there for years. That's you, not me." "What are you suggesting?" my mother asked, caution in her voice. "I'm not signing over the entire inheritance," I clarified. "Grandfather wanted my research protected, and I intend to honor that. But Riley Pharmaceuticals should remain under family management with appropriate oversight." Thomas studied me skeptically. "What kind of arrangement are you proposing?" "A restructuring. You maintain operational control as CEO. I'll hold a position on the board to ensure the company maintains its ethical research standards. We establish a foundation in grandfather's name that receives a percentage of profits to fund independent medical research, including my own." My father looked stunned. "You would do that? After everything we've done?" "Not for you," I said honestly. "For grandfather. For the family he tried to preserve even knowing the truth. And for Thomas, who deserves a chance to prove himself on his own terms, not in the shadow of a biological legacy that was never his." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "Why would you help me after how we treated you? After what Mom did to your lab?" "Because family is more than DNA," I said, echoing grandfather's words. "It's more than perfect behavior, too. It's choosing to remain connected even when it's difficult. Especially then." The conversation continued for hours as we worked through practical details, emotional wounds, and the logistics of moving forward. There were tears, accusations, apologies, and eventually the first tentative steps toward reconciliation. My mother broke down completely when discussing the laboratory incident, her remorse seemingly genuine. "I was desperate," she admitted, "terrified of losing everything we'd built. It doesn't excuse what I did." "The university is pressing charges," I informed her calmly. "I can't stop that process, but I won't add personal charges." By evening, we had reached a tentative agreement about how to proceed with both the inheritance and our fractured relationships. Nothing was perfectly resolved, but for the first time in years we had spoken to each other with complete honesty. As I prepared to leave, Thomas walked me to my car. "I still don't understand why you're doing this," he said. "You could take everything, run the company your way." "That was never what I wanted," I replied. "And it wasn't what grandfather wanted either. He believed in balance, in each of us finding our true purpose. And if I fail, if I run the company into the ground," I smiled slightly, "then the board, including me, will remove you. This isn't charity, Thomas. It's an opportunity to become the person you want to be, not who our parents tried to shape you into." He nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can live up to that." "Neither do I admitted. "But grandfather believed we both had potential worth investing in. That's something, isn't it?" As I drove away, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with legal complexities and emotional minefields. But for the first time since grandfather's death, I could see a path forward that honored his true legacy, not the money or the company, but his belief in the power of truth and the possibility of redemption. 6 months after the DNA test revelation that shattered our family's foundation, I stood in my new laboratory, watching as technicians installed state-of-the-art genetic sequencing equipment. The space was 3 times larger than my previous lab, with dedicated areas for each phase of our research and comfortable offices for my expanding team. The Arthur Riley Foundation for Genetic Research, established with 30% of my inheritance, had already gained recognition in the scientific community. We had secured additional funding from the National Institutes of Health, based on our preliminary results, and 2 pharmaceutical companies were interested in developing screening tests based on our findings. True to my word, I had restructured grandfather's estate in a way that honored his intentions while creating a sustainable path forward. Thomas received operational control of Riley Pharmaceuticals as CEO with a substantial but non-controlling ownership stake. I maintained majority ownership, but focused my involvement on the board of directors, where I chaired the Ethics and Research Committee. The arrangement had not been without challenges. Thomas initially struggled with the oversight, chafing at having to justify business decisions he previously would have made unilaterally. But gradually, he began to appreciate the balance of perspectives, particularly as our more ethically driven approach attracted positive industry attention and new investment. My mother had performed 200 hours of community service for the laboratory vandalism, working at a women's shelter, where surprisingly, she had found a genuine calling, helping others rebuild their lives after crisis. My father had taken longer to adjust to the new reality, his pride wounded by both the biological revelation about Thomas and the restructuring of the company he had helped build. But recently, he had begun consulting on special projects, his expertise still valuable, even as he learned to work within a more collaborative framework. The family estate had been converted into the foundation headquarters, with grandfather's private study preserved exactly as he had left it. I kept the key on my desk as a reminder of the truth that had set us all free, however painfully. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, I was reviewing the latest research data when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Dr. Riley, your brother is here to see you." Thomas entered looking more relaxed than I had seen him in years. The corporate uniform of suit and tie had been replaced by casual slacks and a button-down shirt, and the perpetual crease between his eyebrows had softened. "Impressive setup," he commented, looking around the laboratory. "Grandfather would have loved this." "I think so too," I agreed. "How are things at the company?" "Better than expected, actually." He smiled slightly. "The new arthritis medication is moving to phase 3 trials ahead of schedule. And the board approved my proposal for the patient assistance program." "I heard. That was good work, Thomas." He shrugged modestly. "It was the right thing to do. Making medications affordable for people who need them most aligns with what grandfather would have wanted." We had reached a fragile peace in recent months, our shared commitment to honoring grandfather's legacy, providing common ground even as we continued to process the family secrets that had defined our relationship for decades. Actually, Thomas continued, that's partly why I'm here. I found something while cleaning out some old files at the office. I thought you should have it. He handed me a worn leather portfolio. Inside was a collection of newspaper clippings, scientific journal articles, and handwritten notes all about my research. Grandfather had been following my work more closely than I had ever realized, collecting evidence of my progress and impact for years. He kept this in his desk at the company, Thomas explained. I don't think anyone else knew about it. I traced my finger over grandfather's familiar handwriting, in the margins thoughtful questions, connections to broader scientific principles, occasional expressions of pride. Thank you for bringing this, I said, genuinely moved. Thomas nodded. I've been doing a lot of thinking about truth lately, about how much energy we all spent maintaining lies instead of just living honestly. It's never too late to start, I offered. That's the other reason I came by. He took a deep breath. I've been in contact with Catherine, my biological mother. This was unexpected. How did you find her? Hired a private investigator. Turns out she's been sober for 20 years, living in Oregon. She's a counselor at a rehabilitation center. Have you met her? He nodded. Last weekend. It was intense, but good. She never stopped thinking about me, Madison. She has a box of birthday cards she wrote every year, but never sent. I could see the emotion in his eyes, the complex mix of grief for lost time and hope for a new connection. She wants to meet the whole family eventually, he continued. Even Mom and Dad. She says she's let go of the anger long ago. That's incredibly generous of her. More generous than we deserve, he acknowledged. But that's the thing I've learned through all this. Holding on to resentment only hurts yourself in the end. His words reminded me of something grandfather had written in his journal. Forgiveness is not absolution for others. It is freedom for oneself. How are Mom and Dad taking the news? I asked. Dad is processing. Mom is actually the one who suggested a family dinner with Catherine when she's ready. Says it's time to stop running from the past. I smiled. Sounds like we're all growing up finally. Better late than never, Thomas agreed. As we walked through the laboratory, I showed him our latest projects, explaining the potential applications in terms he could understand. For the first time in our adult lives, he seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions and offering perspectives from the pharmaceutical development side. You know, he said as we finished the tour, I always resented your relationship with grandfather. I thought he favored you because you were more like him, because you shared his interest in science. And now? Now I think he saw something in both of us. Different strengths, different purposes. He just wanted us to be our best selves, not copies of him or our parents. I nodded. I think that's exactly what he wanted. As Thomas prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. The company is hosting a benefit next month for rare disease research. Would you consider being the keynote speaker? Talk about your work and the foundation. I'd be honored, I said sincerely. After he left, I returned to grandfather's portfolio, reading through his collected observations of my career. On the final page was a note he had written just weeks before his death. Madison has surpassed all my expectations. Her work stands on its own merits, now no longer in need of my protection. But the world still needs minds like hers to be free to pursue truth without constraint. My final gift to her will be this freedom, and my final gift to Thomas will be the opportunity to become the man I know he can be, once freed from the shadow of expectations not truly meant for him. May they both forgive an old man's secrecy, and understand it came from love. 6 months ago, I had watched in eerie calm as my mother destroyed my laboratory, believing she was dismantling my life's work. I couldn't have imagined then that her destructive act would ultimately lead to rebuilding something stronger. Not just my research program, but our family itself. The truth had indeed set us free, though not in the way any of us had anticipated. Grandfather's carefully orchestrated revelation had forced us to confront the lies we had lived with for decades. The process had been painful, sometimes devastating, but ultimately necessary for authentic healing to begin. As I looked around my new laboratory at the dedicated researchers, working toward discoveries that might change countless lives, I felt grandfather's presence more strongly than ever, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living legacy continued through purpose and truth. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew? How did you handle it? I would love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more reflections on family truth and finding your path even when others try to derail it. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most painful revelations can lead to the most authentic relationships if we have the courage to face them with honesty and compassion.